This is an interview with Ben Brown by Cliff Kuhn for the Georgia Government Documentation Project of Georgia State University, Wednesday, October 23rd at 1996 in Ben Brown's apartment in Atlanta. Well, last time we were mainly talking about up through the student movement days, and before we leave sort of your activity in the student movement, anything else that comes to mind about those days? I mean, I'm sort of interested in.
I think I need to put on some hair, don't you?
Okay.
It's
Okay, so going back to student movement days, I'd be interested to know sort of how decisions were made, both at the Atlanta University Center in terms of the student activists and the organization and so forth, and also with SNCC and what kind of role you have with SNCC once it's set up as an organization too.
Well, let's start with the Atlanta Committee on Appeal for Human Rights.
Right.
The group of which I was a member. We had a representative group from each of the schools, each of the 6 schools. There were 2, I think, or maybe 3 members from each school on the what we call the governing body. My role initially was treasurer, and then they made me chairman of the action committee. That is, coordinating the planning for the different demonstrations, marches, or what have you. And that was pretty much my role, but it was also like people have told me this, I'm not just tooting my own horn, they were saying that, well, it was key operative, keeping it together. Okay. That's the role that most people have described Ben Brown as during the Atlanta Committee on Appeal.
Well,
early days.
You describe what that meant in practice. Okay, so what are sort of obstacles you had, or?
Well, I mean, actually, I didn't have obstacles. I was able to cut across school lines, personal biases and envy and jealousies, and had a straight line to communication with people. And I think I was trusted by all sides. And of course, there was differences in opinions as to what was to be done at a given time. And I never saw myself as the saint of the whole group. I was sort of made that because of the confidence and trust that the different players put in me, including Lonnie King.
Mm-hmm. The what of the whole group?
The saint.
The saint, okay.
No, I was not the saint, far from that.
Right.
But for some reason, you will find me in the middle of all of the issues, trying to work them out.
Give some examples.
Well, the primary example is the one when the compromise was being made on the downtown, and everybody wanted to push me up to be the leader, to take over and dethrone Lonnie King and our negotiators. And I said no. It didn't make sense at that point. It was incidents like that. When we were having the question of, will Dr. King participate in the march or will he not?
In the sit-in.
In the sit-in.
Yeah.
But we invite him in to participate with us.
Who was taking what side on that one? Or do you
well, Lonnie didn't want him in. Lonnie King did not want him in the deal. And he went on to say why. He said that we don't want him taking all the recognition and the thunder from our efforts. My position was he is the resource that, and this was not a middle position, this was an advocacy position. It was that we need him to heighten the interest in what we're trying to do here in the city of Atlanta. Because at that point he had international recognition.
And hadn't done too much locally.
No, I hadn't done anything locally. I mean, they didn't even know he was from Atlanta, pretty much. I mean, some of us did, but most folks thought he was from Alabama. But the overriding consideration was that Dr. King would attract national and international media, which would highlight what we were trying to do in Atlanta to correct the ills.
What do you recall, if anything, about the economic boycott of Riches?
Well, it hurt him. I mean, that particular effort was beginning as I was graduating.
Right.
But it was quite clear that the economic boycott was effective because it was around Easter time, I think, when it was started. And of course, Easter is one of the high seasons for merchandising. And the black community was a major part of the market that Richard served. And consequently, they suffered great losses that year. And by the time Christmas rolled around, I think things have been straightened out.
How would you deal with sort of traditional student sort of problems like graduation or the conflict between being involved in the movement and getting grades and being in class and things like that? I mean, these are things that are endemic to student life. So
Well, it was quite clear that some students forgot that they were students and they had a goal to accomplish. Personally, I didn't. I knew that the movement was something that had grabbed my interest and my energy. But fortunately, by the time the movement got to its peak during my time, uh, I had completed most of my requirements in school. My second semester of 1961, I had 9 hours to take in order to qualify for graduation. So personally, I was quite conscious of it, but I can't say that for some of the others. I think some of the other students used it as an excuse not to do their schoolwork, and therefore they fell by the wayside. But it was never in my mind that the movement would be preoccupational for me for the rest of my life. I knew it was something that would come and would go. And that's when I graduated, I left here. I went to New York that summer just to break. I worked in New York, and that was a hell of an experience. That was summer of '61.
yeah,
And I worked at the Gallagher Hall Annex. Gallagher,
how do you spell?
I'm not sure whether it's Gallagher or Gallagher. I think it's Gallagher Hall
Okay. What is
Annex. It was a home for young girls, 11 to 13, and I was the coordinator of recreation for that summer. And that gave me a chance to give me a mental break because I didn't realize how obsessed I was with the movement and how deeply I was in it. Because in the back of my mind, I was prepared to go to Howard University Law School that fall. Had I not had that break, I don't think I would have been able to adjust to the Howard situation easily.
Okay. How did you get that job?
I got that job through the Clark College Alumni Association of New York. That was a lady who was well positioned there in New York, and one of the policies of our alumni council or our alumni association is to help our youngsters if they ask for it.
You mentioned last time you have relatives in New Jersey and in the New York area. Is that right?
Yes, I have relatives in New Jersey.
Right. So you've been to New York before.
Oh
so-
yeah, I'd been there. It was not going into a strange area,
Right.
but it was the first time I was going on my own as an adult and not coming back in 2 weeks. I stayed the whole summer,
Right.
and
First time you'd worked for any period of time outside of Atlanta.
oh yeah, no question, no question.
What informed and sort of when and how did you make the decision to go to Howard Law School?
Well, I knew I was going to graduate school. I mean, I knew that finishing Clark was not complete for me in terms of my training and my education. I was first ready to go to Boston University School of Social Work, not just Boston, School of Social Work. So I started talking to people, Carl Holman and Dr. C. Eric Lincoln. C. Eric recommended me for admission to Boston University School of Social Work.
Now, was he here? He was
He was
here.
at Clark
He was
College.
at Clark, okay.
Yes. And Eric got me accepted rather, at Boston School of Social Work, Boston University School of Social Work. And I thought about it. I wanted to go to the University of Georgia Law School, but the lawyers, Hollowell and all of them, told me maybe I need to rethink that since they were in the middle of trying to integrate the school at the undergraduate level with Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter, and did not need a third leg to get into that. I accepted that. And it was at that point that my interest turned toward Howard. Matter of fact, they suggested that I go down. And,
This is Hollowell and
well, Hollowell primarily. Hollowell primarily. But I'm sure they had roundtables, discussions about it. But the message came to me through Don Hollowell.
okay. Let's talk a bit about Hollowell because he often gets overlooked, and so let's talk about. And I know later on you clerked briefly at the Hollowell firm, but
Right.
let's talk about sort of his role, his relationship with the movement, the students, and so forth.
Well, Don he was there. H.E. Walden was getting older, but they all deferred to Obey Walden. Don was smart enough to realize that this was an opportunity for him to, get into the mix. Because he was a lawyer late. He didn't get in there as a youngster, he got in there late.
Right.
But he did so well, he came on in the mix and was very political. He would come to our meetings, and he was the legal man. He was just the legal man. Plus, he was a fatherly figure to so many of them. He was tall and a deep voice, and just he would just bring such a very, experience to the table.
You're talking about Hollowell.
Yeah, Don Hollowell he was just a model for me, and everybody respected him. He stood tall, spoke with authority, and we had all the confidence in the world that he could do anything to protect us. That's the way I looked at him. And it was fortunate that he comes out of the same religious denomination that I do. So I had a line on him,
Did you go to the same church?
No, we were in different
Okay.
churches.
Okay.
He went to he goes to Butler Street. He's still living,
Oh, I know. I'm well aware. It brings up a question. You had sort of the Walton generation, the Warren Cochran Walton generation. Then you have a group of younger men: Hollowell, Jesse Hill, Leroy Johnson. Joe
Well,
Boone.
Hollowell was a little. Well, see, you had the Walden Aikens.
Right.
Hollowell came after that.
Right. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying Hollowell's
But
the sort of-
Jesse didn't come with that.
Okay.
Jesse come after Hollowell.
Right.
Yeah.
You
But
have
Hollowell was the old guy with the Jesse Hill group.
right, and I guess Leroy Johnson and Joe Boone are roughly that age, 40-ish or so, and then you all are around 20 or 21
Yeah.
or 22. And
Joe Boone, that's an interesting character. But anyway.
Well, go on with your thought there.
No, let's
I
go.
mean, what I'm interested in is sort of the interplay between the different generations around those years, 60, 61.
All right, let me see if I can delineate that. Because I saw it, and I was sensitive to it. And I knew how each piece fitted in my mind and how it would benefit what we're trying to do.
We'll kind of reconstruct that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can. Now, my immediate identification, of course, was with my peer group. We were all in school, 20 years old when this thing started. I was 20. Jesse Hill, Whitney Young, Carl Holman, Clint Warner, Clinton Warner, Dr.
Okay,
Warner,
right.
and Vernon was a younger boy in that group.
What about Dr. Davis?
Dr. Davis was on the other end. He was a
Okay,
little older.
okay.
I would put Dr. Davis, Hollowell, and let me continue with
Okay.
the Jesse Hill thing.
Okay.
Jesse Hill, Leroy Johnson, Horace Ward, Clint Warner, Whitney Young, Carl Holman, Howard Zinn, Lois Moreland. She was on the periphery. They didn't accept women into the clique.
So Lottie Watkins also.
Oh, no, hold
Right,
that one.
okay.
Hold that one.
Okay.
So that group of men, primarily, and Lois, represented the late 30s, early 40s. They were no more than 13, the max 15 years older. I mean the max. That group. And then you had another group. And you had a group of women on the other side of that, late 40s, early 50s. You had Lottie Watkins, Eunice Cooper, Ruth Sturdivant, Pearl Henderson, Reba Greenwood. That's the core group of the women. Johnny Yancey. They was very strong, NAACP oriented, but supportive and sensitive to what we were doing. Very political. Now the corresponding male group to that late part of the 50s was the Don Hollowells, the Albert Davises, uh, Pascals. They were not active, but they were there. And then to me, I learned later that there was a group of men who sort of controlled the sub-economy of this town. Auburn Avenue, 100th Street, sub-economy operators. Now that's a very touchy thing, but everybody knew that they were operating the lottery.
The bug.
The bug, the street bug. But those guys were supported. I mean, they put money up to get us out of jail. They made contributions to the YMCA. I mean, they played a very significant part in the evolution of the black thing in Atlanta. I mean, they played a very important part. I can testify to that because they used to operate businesses, and I would go to their businesses and get contributions from the West. But it was general knowledge that they controlled the numbers. And I later learned that not only did they control the numbers, but they controlled many of our legitimate businesses that we gave praise to.
Who are you talking about?
Well, I am not in a position to say that. I don't think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
But anybody in Atlanta would tell you the folk who ran the sub-economy during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I don't know whether it still is. I'm
they
sure
have,
there
like,
is a sub-economy, but I don't know that.
But now we got a state lottery too.
Mm-hmm.
Did they operate storefront businesses that were the fronts for, you know?
Well, it was very clear that they were legitimate businesses, sure. We can go to any place.
So you get.
Go on, I'm going to put some water on these plants. Right.
Okay. That's a part of the tale, of course, that's hardly ever been.
Well, people
highlighted
don't
or
tell
mentioned.
it, yeah, but when Don and them wanted some money to get us out of jail, they went to the people who had it. And there was always a close relationship, from what I could see, between, the intelligentsia and the moneygencia. And I didn't have any problem with it until I later learned that it was, something that doesn't supposed to be. Well, I guess I knew that, but it's just one of the ironies of the life and culture of Americans, not just blacks.
Right. So you've begun to delineate these different distinct groups generationally, and
And I thought it was very important because each one brought a level of experience that the other one didn't have at the time.
Okay, so
The ones who had the most experience was that next group, beyond Hollowell, and that was the Cochrans, the Aikens, the Waltons, the Borders, the Daddy Kings, the W.W. Witherspoons, the Searcy, E.R. Searcy.
Right.
There was a whole group of ministers in this town who were just down there. H.I. Bearden, who became an AME church bishop.
Don't know anything about him.
I know. I'm giving you these
Well,
names.
that's what it's important to include these names and talk about them.
They were the ones who drove and Reverend Johnson, Joseph P. Johnson. They were those names that I just gave you are the people who drove the Negro Voters League, because it was all generated through the church primarily. And C.A. Scott, that was the old guard. See, I've delineated 4 groups for you.
Right.
And the
talk
old guard.
Okay, let's talk about the old guard and then go down the line.
Go
and
back
talk
down.
about what each contribution was and
Well,
their
the old
interplay
guard,
with each other too.
well, the old guard, by definition, had the greatest, the depth of experience and practice of politics in this town. I mean, by definition, the old guard. They'd been around longer. They had the lay of the land. They had control of the politics, and they played that part. They had a marriage with Williams B. Hartsfield and the white folk in this town, and they kept it cool. And that was what their day dictated. I mean, they were the ones who said, let's not break these districts down to wards and stuff like that. Let's keep it at large, and we'll give you 30% of the vote if you come up with the right white folk. And they did. And came up with Williams B. Hartsfield, who was more progressive than any of the other Southern mayors at the time. And he was that way because he would sit at the table and negotiate with Warren and Yates and Milton and Aikens, Walton, Searcy, Johnson, Borders, King, and all of those big boys. And I used to keep up with it. I wish I could pull some more. Well, I tell you, Dr. Rufus Clement was elected to the Atlanta School Board in 1952. And the only reason Dr. Clemens was elected is because they made the deal. They told William B. Hartsfield, said, listen, we have got to elect somebody to something. And if you can't do that, then we can't re-elect you. I mean, they knew how to use the power from all indications. So they elected Dr. Clemens to the school board, and he was exemplary. he was the last of the great college presidents with the watch chain and the best in the whole bit. I mean, he was it. He represented us well. Of course, some people, once you get into the system, you become a handkerchief head, so they say. But I don't think he was ever that. I think he was always conscious of the challenge that faced the American Negroes at that time. That's what they called us. And he worked toward it in the fashion in which he was comfortable and in which he was capable of doing. And that is as an educated man who had been around the world and who had been exposed. So he was great. I admired him. So the old guard, that was their thing. But now, get me right now. They were in their 40s at that time when they started kicking. 50 years ago, they were basically 40 years in their 40s. And those are the things that they did. And then later in 64, I think it was, once we, the old guard was kind of moving into the background, and the Hollowell, Q.V. Williamson, they were in limbo. I mean, they were between the ACA, Jesse and them, and the old guard.
Right.
So they ended up being the foundation for Jesse and this crowd as they pushed for representation at the city and the state level. Leroy went to the Senate.
Where would you put? We'll get to Leroy because I know you have a complicated relationship with Leroy over the years. But where would Leroy fall in the spectrum? You know.
Well, Leroy, that's what I'm trying to say. The old guy was here. They loved Leroy because he stepped out there. And I forgot another name. T.M. Alexander was Mr. Republican. Leroy stepped out there and said, listen, we're going to go city, we're going to go state. But Leroy was with the Jesse Hill crowd. I mean, he's there. Yeah, he's in that group. And,
late 30s, 40-ish or so.
Oh, yeah, Leroy was he was, oh, man, are we talking 35 years ago? We
We're
sure
talking
are.
about 35 years ago. So he
was 30-something.
Yeah, I think he was 40 when he ran in 62 or something like that, close to it, maybe late 30s.
Late 30s.
Okay.
He couldn't have been 40 because he's not 70-something years old. Well, yes, he is. He's getting there.
At any rate,
Let's see. Let's calculate. He finished college with Martin with Harrisburg in 49.
so that would put him up.
But let's say
close to
20 years.
70-ish, maybe a little bit more.
He's old. He's old. But anyway, that's the deal on Leroy. And, I guess he is 71, 72.
Okay. So let's talk back to the Hollowell group. You're saying began to call for representation. That was one of their contributions.
Well, they made that.
Where they departed from the old guard in a sense.
Yeah, they said let's break this down. Let's get this. And then there was rumblings about whether or not, because it was beginning to happen all over the country. How can you have all these black folk living in these cities had no representation. And we had that large automatic race account. So we were able to get QV in there, and he was a Republican, and that caused some anxiety.
That's 65, is that right?
64, I believe.
64, okay.
No, it had to be 65.
Because the mayor's race is 65.
Yeah, 65, because I had just returned from law school.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was earlier, but that's been
Maybe,
a while.
okay, well, I can find those dates.
No, because I know it wasn't in 61. He wasn't on there when I left.
Right. No, it's either 64 or 65.
It's 60. Could be 64. It's 64.
Okay.
Because I had finished in June and came back. Yeah, 64.
Okay.
Because the election is in off years, 65. Okay, 65. So we put on a real attempt to get our first black to the council, and he was great. Nobody got all hung up on the Republican thing. We talked about it, but it didn't matter because the city elections are nonpartisan.
Right.
So,
Okay, so then the group with Jesse Hill, and then talk about their. Actually, no. First, talk about the women that you were talking about and their role and their involvement. Let me flip this. Well, let's talk about the women because again, they get overlooked in this story, and let's talk about what role they played and where they were positioned, and the Eunice Cooper's, Ruth Sturdivant's, etc.
well, I think you're absolutely right. People don't realize the significant role that those ladies played. And I'll name them, see if we can set the context here. Johnny Yancey, Ruth Sturdivant, Lottie Watkins, Eunice Cooper, Pearl Henderson, Reba Greenwood. That was a name that popped up. She was like a phantom. Lois
She was like a phantom.
Phantom. I mean,
How
you
so?
hear her name all the time, but you never saw her. But you knew she was in there.
Lois Moreland.
Lois Moreland, Judge Powell.
Judge Powell. Okay.
What's her first name? She was working with Hollowell at the time. She was a lawyer.
Okay. What about Ruby Blackwell? Is that a name that rings a bell?
Ruby Blackwell, yeah. Ruby Blackwell. That name rings a bell.
Negro Voters League, Women Voters League, something like that. Do you know anything?
It wasn't prominent
Okay.
in my mind.
Okay, she was sort of from a different background, than these other ladies. What about
Oh, no question.
Lucy Grigsby? Is she part of that or?
See, you talking about people of recent vintage.
Okay,
The people I'm mentioning are the
Right.
ones who were there in 60
right.
when I was there, 61. Of course, there's a whole new crew I'm to come along.
Well, let's talk about first crew. What sort of where they positioned themselves, what they did, what their role was, etc.
Well, Ruth Sturdivant was a businesswoman. She was the wife of the shoe shop man. They had two shops, one on either side of town, Auburn Avenue and MLK. Johnny Yancey was a prominent doctor's wife, typical 1950-ish doctor's wife. Good looking the whole bit. All these women were good looking. They took care of themselves. Lottie Watkins was a premier businesswoman, real estate. She had broken into something. She was property management and just a dashing lady. Very, very nice. And now, mind you, they were all in their 40s by then.
Right.
Yeah, they were good looking women. Pearl Henderson was an old lady in the group. She came from the east side of town, from the projects. I think Miss Henderson lived in the projects, but anyway, she was old Catholic family that NAACP, and she would be right there. She was Miss Sturdivant's best friend.
Okay, her name. I'm not as
Never
familiar
heard
with her
Pearl
as I am
Henderson.
the others. So tell me a bit more about her.
Pearl Henderson was just classic lady. I mean, she was older, and it was amazing to me of her interest in the civil rights thing. So, and she was very fair-skinned. So maybe that was a motivating thing that she wanted to clean up some things. But matter of fact, all these women were fair-skinned except Lottie. Lottie was kind of brown. But I couldn't tell you any more about Miss Henderson other than she was a dedicated NAACP worker.
Right.
Whenever we said, Miss Henderson, we need this, that, and other, she would be right there to do it. These ladies prepared food, sandwiches for us, and would bring them to the office. And I mean, they just kept us cuddled and just gave us what we needed. At least that's the way I looked at it. I can't speak for everybody. I can only speak for me, what it meant to me. I got a lifelong relationship out of all of that with Lottie and Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Sturdivant. And my children didn't know their grandparents because they all dead by the time they came along. Well, they knew one, my daddy,
Right.
but they didn't know a grandmother, neither one of them. So she became their grandmother out of that experience. They called her Mother Sturdivant. Now, I called her Mother Sturdivant. She just sort of adopted us. My boys would call her and go by and visit her, even without my knowledge. But that's what she meant to me. And
That's enormous.
Lottie Watkins gave me my first political contribution, and she supported me throughout the experience. Matter of fact, she took my seat when I resigned to go to Washington. She won that.
How about Eunice Cooper?
Eunice Cooper was Miss Busybody. Miss Eunice was secretary of the NAACP for as long as I can remember. So she was active there. She had information, and she would be right there coordinating with Mrs. Sturdivant and Lottie. They were all friends. I wish you would go by and see Eunice. And Eunice would talk you to death now.
Well, I know somebody else has done an interview with her.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't seen her in years. I hope she's all right.
This was a few years back, so. Now, you just mentioned some things that let's go into just, while I'm thinking about them. Tell me about sort of the differences or the etiquette between people on the east side, people on the west side, people in the projects, people out of the Atlanta University Center, the kind of, who play
But
what
during the
roles.
Syrian movement, all those divisions sort of melted. I mean, I knew because I'd grown up with people. Lonnie King came from the east side of town, but I met Lonnie at the Y, common vehicle. There were people in the projects who got involved, but you couldn't tell it. There were no lines, as far as I was concerned, that separated one type of protester from another. I didn't see that. Matter of fact, even with the university, people always talk about the divisions between the schools. During the citizen movement, you didn't see none of that.
What about division between fair-skinned and brown-skinned? Or
That was always a problem, but during the movement, all that stuff was negated. But it came back. I mean, it's back now. We have a real struggle in our community about the high yellows and the browns and the blacks.
Okay, but you're saying
But during the
that kind of
citizen
stuff got
movement,
put to the background.
it neutralized all of that. I mean, we were even talking about why are these schools different? Why aren't we one university? Those were the kinds of things that we talked about during the 60s.
No, was there a distinction between Morris Brown and the other schools?
No, well, the only distinction is that Morris Brown was the AME school,
Right.
and they had less cosmopolitan types going there. That was a clear distinction. I mean, Clark was more of a universal kind of proletariat working class first generation professionals child going to school. Morehouse and Spelman prided themselves on having the elite of the black community. Now those were givens, but you wouldn't have known that during the city movement.
Okay.
You wouldn't have known that.
Now you say a lot of these women were stalwarts of the NAACP, and maybe let's flesh out sort of where the NAACP stood 50s into the early 60s.
Oh,
I know
well,
Calhoun was a player, but who else was involved?
Calhoun was a real player. Matter of fact, he was president of the Atlanta chapter for years and was a leader. I mean, he had things to work on. Albert Davis was very active. Ruth Sturdivant, Pearl Henderson, Eunice Cooper was his secretary. not his secretary, but secretary of the NAACP.
Right.
And Reba Greenwood again, that name. Clint Warner. All the same, you find that the same people that.
So their relationship to the students was what?
Their relationship to the students basically was, all right, since we didn't start this, let's get in there and help these kids and protect them. That's what really manifested. The NAACP, as you know, nationally, was a little concerned about this kind of protest because it was too much akin to what Dr. King was doing. Therefore, we won't do that. But the Atlanta group, they might have had that same philosophy, but they didn't show it because they were right there to support us at every turn. And I'm sure they would have rather proceeded along the traditional NAACP lines, but their organizational integrity was being challenged. Not only from the students, but Dr. King, and the Muslim group was emerging, and they were saying, who are we? The whole question of leadership. Roy Wilkins was in his final days there, and they were questioning how they were to approach the social and political issues of the day.
So you're saying here, the way they decided was.
You join in with the students.
Did you ever, speaking of NAACP, what kind of dealings, if any, did you ever have with Mr. Law in Savannah?
I was going to go to Wesley. Oh, that is my hero. In a historical digest, which is a publication, I don't know whether it's a Georgia publication or not, but he's on the front page. I just read a story about it. But Wesley and I are very close friends. And Wesley dominated state NAACP for years. He was elected to the national board. I think he was the youngest to ever be elected to that board. And he would always fight the Atlanta group for control of the state, but he would always win. Johnny Knows could never take the state organization from him because he was a brilliant man, and he's literary. I mean, he's a literary. Have you
I've
interviewed
interviewed
him?
Mr. Law.
Oh, so you know him.
But can you tell me about him?
But Wesley is he's a hell of a guy. I like the way he got out of that little mess. They accused him of pissing on somebody's lawn as a postman, and that was a national controversy. But it elevated him to national prominence within the NAACP. I don't think he liked the Atlanta crowd at all. I don't think he did. But I got the impression that he was very, very pleased with the activity of the students.
Now, what would give you the impression that he didn't like the Atlanta crowd?
The way they used to fight every year. And of course, the newspaper people would blow it up and talk about the Atlanta versus. It was divide and conquer. And he held on his own. I mean, that was a division between Atlanta and non-Atlanta. Wesley had all of non-Atlanta. And non-Atlanta is bigger than Atlanta. Okay?
And non-Atlanta sometimes gets overlooked in the story.
Yeah, all the time. I mean, see, when we get into my political thing, non-Atlanta was my base.
Oh,
Wesley Law was key to it on the coast.
Okay.
All right?
Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
in a
we'll
little
get to
bit,
that.
yeah.
That's the part that's so fascinating because
Right.
I used to knock them all out. These big boys in Atlanta with these big high profiles, they would all go the wrong way. Because they never gave any credence to what I do. In my methodology, they call it luck. Of course it's luck. But luck manifested through how you use it. And if you don't know how to use it, luck in the world, you don't get a damn thing done. But anyway,
Let's
that's
make sure
one
we
piece
get to
with-
that in another piece.
Man,
Okay,
that's the
'cause
part that just gets to my emotions, so I want to talk about that so badly.
We'll do it.
But W.W. Law is one of the greatest Americans I've ever met. He taught me a lot. When I was in law school, he would come to Washington, consult with Thurgood and the people, So one day he decided to come by. See, he knew me when I was in college.
Right.
I would go to Savannah. Savannah was my little place where I went. I had a very dear friend down there that I used to go visit. And I would always see Wesley. So he came up to Washington up there, came by my apartment. We had the biggest argument. We were talking about, he was giving me some history, which I was aware of, but I had a different perspective on it. He was talking about, I can't quite remember all of it, but we were talking about this thing about education, accommodating, non-accommodating white folks' agenda. And my position was that, and this was a naive position, was that the level of education was not such that we could do much more than we did during that period. But anyway,
You were talking about
Wesley.
you and his conversation up in Washington about
I think I got it
accommodation.
reconstructed.
Yeah.
Yeah, somehow my position at that time, I was 21 years old, I was saying, that they accepted some things then that they shouldn't have accepted because of their lack of education and worldliness. And so he took the opportunity to lecture to me on that. And that's where I think I really learned that you have to take things as they are. You work with the circumstances within which you find yourself. And as long as you have a positive commitment to correct and change and work toward the better, then that's all right. And you don't have the luxury of criticizing what has gone on before, which I see very clearly now as a 56-year-old man. Oh, I saw it clearly then when Wesley got through with me. And I appreciated that, because if you don't get different perspective from people, you're very limited in your understanding and knowledge. And what I've say to my younger friends now, I said, well, it seems as though young people have a tendency to close off their learning valve somewhere between 18 and 25. Nothing else to learn. They got it all. And that's bullshit. If you're gonna, and I learned then that you have to keep your learning valve open. It never closes. If you really want to be significant abroad, I mean, if you want to be there, it's all out there to do. And that was what Westerlaw gave me, and I'm just so, tickled pink. And last week I was down in Griffin, and someone gave me this magazine. You know this man, don't you? And I was tickled pink. They were talking about his work as a preservationist.
Law.
And
Oh, right.
and the museum.
Right.
He told me he wanted me to put some in that museum, so I guess we have to give him a copy of our interview.
That's great. I've worked with him. That's no
Yeah.
problem.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go back a bit to describing the different groups in Atlanta, because we're still in Atlanta,
Yeah.
basically. So let's talk about the ACA crowd, Jesse Hill, the men of that ilk and generation in the late 30s.
Yeah, who were in the age of the late 30s.
Right.
Well, those guys, Jesse was running Atlanta Life Insurance. He was actuary at the time. Whitney Young was dean of the School of Social Work. Carl Holman was publisher of the newspaper. We have to talk about the Atlanta Inquirer.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I was a little premature, and Carl was a professor at Clark. And Clint Warner was one of the prominent doctors. Albert Davis was the dean of the doctors in that transitional period. And Leroy Johnson was the politician. And each of those fellows were looking at things quite differently in 1960 than they had been looking at it in 59 because of the student movement. The fact that we had raised and challenged the whole system, and they didn't. They said, well, we better get with this, because this is our chance. They're not in a position to take advantage of it, therefore we should, and prepare for them to come along behind us.
How would that manifest itself?
Well, Leroy Johnson decided to run for office. Jesse Hill of course, he was set. He was the most secure of all of them. He became president of the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. Uh, and they just started raising questions, and out of that whole thing came the second look.
Right.
Yeah, it looked like to me our thing came before the second look.
Well, the second look actually is
First,
right before,
yeah.
and AC.
Our document came, yeah, because we used second look as a basis.
Right.
But anyway, the movement was generating, and we sort of represented the front side of that, but we were all on the same frequency.
Well, let's talk about though generational differences, and I mean, you talked about sort of what each role each had to play. Was that what about friction or division or conflict?
I didn't see any friction or division between the students and the. I did not from my vantage point, but
What about? I mean, I've heard that Mr. Walton got criticized later on in his career, for instance.
all the old guys got criticized by the students because they didn't understand. Same experience I was having at 21, and up there in Washington with Wesley, they were having. Same dynamic. They Lonnie and several of them would talk about the old handkerchief heads, Uncle Tom's, and I stopped them because I had been made wise. And I said, well, we can't destroy these people. These are the people who've laid the foundation for us. They have laid the foundation within the framework that they find themselves in. Now it's up to us to add another plank to it for the next generation. That was my position, and
Is that because you were raised in the Y, or sort of where did that?
well,
come
all
from?
of that was accumulative. The respect for one thing, respect for the elder, and if you had differences, you finessed it. You didn't try to destroy it. And meeting people like Wesley Law who clearly define a perspective which I liked. I'm not saying it's a universal perspective, but it was a perspective that fitted my mode of life, the church. I mean, it all just was accumulative, and I was very much disturbed. And I'll take it even back further when people talk about Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. I got 3 pictures here, which I know I had up in my other unit. I just haven't felt like doing none of that. A picture of Du Bois, Booker Washington, and Malcolm X. Those 3 characters represented Ben Brown. If you could mesh those personalities, you would have me. But before Malcolm even came on the scene, there was questions in my mind about why Du Bois and the boys jumped on Booker T. I didn't see in all of my reading where Booker T jumped on them at all. And I would go on to explain, this was the thesis of my speeches when I was doing public speaking. I said, we lost years. We lost 2 generations because of a schism within our thinking. For Du Bois to say the talented 10th, fine. Ain't nothing wrong with the talented 10th. But for Booker T. Washington to say, just go out here and cultivate, cast down your buckets where you are. If you got land, that's your land. You cast it down, you get there, you pull it out, you produce. I don't see nothing wrong with that. Now, why couldn't those 2 be meshed? Then if you got 10% here, 90% there, you got 100%. And I used to talk about that in my speeches. And if you go even further, right out here, right up the street here in 1896, at the Cotton Exposition, Booker T's great speech. That's the cast down your bucket speech. Right. But that's all they remember. They don't remember the part about, he said, you have the opportunity to compete in commerce and succeed in business. Disregard the superficial for the real. These are things that Booker T. Washington said in 1896. And he even talked about the crabs in the barrel. But the most important thing was disregard the superficial for the real. That didn't get played. And if we can do that, then we can participate more fully in the riches of life. Riches of life. And
Okay, well, let's go back to the Atlanta Inquirer story.
out of the sit-in movement, we were so frustrated that the Atlanta Daily World, Mr. Scott, with his Republican self, who was my friend, wouldn't publish anything about the sit-in movement. He tried to deny that it existed. So we said, let's start a newspaper. And we went to Carl Holman.
Who was the we?
Lonnie King, Carolyn Long Banks had come into the picture by
that time.
By
Okay.
then. Because we had our first meeting at her house. Jim Gibson, who's now with the one of the big liberal, one of the big liberal institutes in Washington.
And who was he then?
Jim Gibson, what was Jim? I really don't know what his role
Was
was.
a student at Clark, or
No,
he
he was working with the NAACP,
Okay.
I believe.
Okay.
He was Miss Pearl Henderson's nephew.
Okay.
You know, they're part of that East Side Catholic, good citizen. You know, the side. They all used to live over here, but that was one of the families that was strong, and they stayed.
Okay.
Jim came out of that. He's now with one of the foundations. I can't think of which one,
Okay.
but he's in Washington.
He was one of the we.
He was one of the we. Julian was one of the we. Look like me, man. Let me strike that. Jim Gibson wasn't. John was his brother.
John Gibson. Okay.
Morris Dillard and myself. No, I'm sure there were others. I just can't
And
think
you
of
went
it.
to Carl.
We went to
Holman.
Carl and we started talking. Then we somehow we got to Carl. I guess Carl brought Jesse in, and they discovered that Laura Ware, who was a part of the ACA group,
Okay.
had license for two newspapers, the Atlanta Voice and the Inquirer.
So he had.
He had both of them. And somehow Jesse and them got a hold of the Inquirer. And we were there. We were going to do the publishing. I was going to be the circulation manager. I didn't know nothing about no circulation. I'd been a carrier of the Atlanta Daily World. So I thought I could get the paper out. And we all assigned things. Julian was assigned editor. And somewhere along the way, before that first edition, Carl Holman got involved. We got the license secured from Laura Ware. And we got our first edition out. And that paper's still going now. Been in business 35 years, 36.
Tell
The
me.
Atlanta Inquirer, we had absolutely no interest in it, no proprietary interest. We were just doing it. But Jesse and them made money off of it. They made good money off of that paper.
So tell me what kinds of things you would include and how it was distinctive from what either the World or the Journal of the Constitution would be.
Well, the Inquirer came out as it was pro-civil rights. Everything was pro-black advancement. We wasn't trying to be no Atlanta Constitution or Atlanta Journal. We were being an advocacy newspaper, which gave, that whole period gave birth to a lot of them, because the traditional newspapers wouldn't give any accounting of what was going on. Mm-hmm.
Let me think. You mentioned the Inquirer. There's something else. Oh, I know this wasn't your struggle, but to what degree did you interact or were aware of, the effort to desegregate the Atlanta public schools? What contact did you have with that whole initiative that was going on at more or less the same time?
Well, I was not involved in it. Matter of fact, I was away.
Right. September '61, right?
Yeah, I was away during that time, and looking at it with great pride that it was going to happen. But the busing part, see, I had a strange. I did not want the busing unless they bus the white children into the black communities as well. That was my position. If you ain't gonna do that, don't come here talking about no busing, because I'm not gonna take my child out of his natural cultural base, put him in a white base, and he's got to return to it. And you think he's gonna be improved? No, he's gonna be more confused. Now, if you want to make it all a confusion, you bust the white folk into the black community and the black folk in the white community, then you got busing. Otherwise, you got cultural crippling. That's the way I looked at it.
I guess we'll get back to busing and the whole compromise later on. Okay.
Oh, the busing was worse. But
Let's move on to Howard. Okay. Tell me some stuff that's going on at Howard. Of course, Houston is still the dean. No, he's dead by that time.
oh no, Charlie Houston's dead.
But let's talk about sort of the legacy of Houston and the.
Well, his
and how-
his name was bigger than life. When I got there, Howard Law School was in trouble. There was a temporary dean, James Nabrit,
Right, who came out of here?
who was born in Atlanta, Georgia. It was a distinguished family of educators. He became dean of the law school for a year. Then the second year, Darcy Lane, who just passed, became. And the third year, Spotswood Robinson. I had a dean every year.
Spotswood,
it
of
was-
course, had come up through the law school and been
Yeah,
one of the
all of them had
Houston
come up.
proteges.
All of them had come up through the law school, including Nabrit. And they were just in shambles. They did not know what to do. Now, mind you, Howard had the reputation even then as being the citadel for constitutional law, vis-a-vis the black community.
Right, sure.
Thurgood Marshall and
Spotswood and
Spotswood and all those people. And I had a chance to see them and know them and meet them all during that period. When old man Walden would come up, Hollowell would come up. Hollowell by then was taking the lead. But they brought Mr. Hollowell just for the ghost of Houston and all the rest of them guys, you know, the history. I remember when they came up to do they did their practice run in our moot court room for I wasn't there when they did the Brown versus Board of Education, but there was another one in 62, 61. Maybe that was Charlene Hunter. It was the Charlene Hunter.
could have been. Or was it a desegregation case?
Yeah, it
or-
was a desegregation
It
case.
wasn't Gamillion versus Lightfoot, you know, the Tuskegee political case.
No,
No,
this was Atlanta.
it was in Atlanta. So, okay.
It might have been
So they came up and argued before the court.
when they did their practice at Howard Law School in our moot court room, which was exciting. And unfortunately, I had an opportunity to see my home folk. Dr. Hollowell came by my apartment, you know, student. Hollowell, oh, that was big stuff. And Wesley was up for that too. So it was some big case involving NAACP. I can't even remember.
Could have been the Atlanta school case,
Could have been.
or
Could have been. You have to go back and check that.
yeah,
I don't,
okay, but it was when you were.
I was a student. I was preoccupied.
Is that when you had your discussion with Wesley?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, Howard. There are a lot of undergraduate students at Howard who get involved in the movement and what is it, NAG? Was that the name of the organization?
Well, by the time I got to Howard Law School, I was out of the student movement. I was out of it. And I don't know what the students were doing at Howard.
So you didn't have any contact with, you know, whomever, Stokely or whomever was
Well,
at
I
Howard?
would see Stokely at parties. I mean, but in terms of, yeah, I knew I met him there. But I didn't get involved with the student movement at Howard University. When I went to law school, I went to law school. My focus was on the law school, getting in and getting out, and coming back to Georgia and getting into politics. I was just that focused.
So even in law school, you sort of saw politics.
Oh, I planned my election while I was in law school. See, I graduated in 1964. Georgia was going through its court battle, Sanders versus O'Hara, O'Hara Sanders, or whatever.
Right.
And I said, "Oh, this is my shot." Now, mentally, I planned my campaign from my kitchen at Howard Law School. I graduated '64. I went to clerk for Horace Ward in Hollowell. And then the case came down, and ordered the elections in '65, drew the lines, and I ran. That's a year after I was home.
Right.
And I won.
We'll get to that in a minute
I
because
know.
you were involved already before then, if I'm not mistaken, running Horace Ward's campaign.
Sure.
So let's talk about.
Young Democrat, the whole bit.
Had you been involved at all with Leroy's campaign for the state senate? I know you were Washington at 62, but what was
No, no more than proud that my fraternity brother was going. We don't say our fraternity name too loud these days.
Right.
Phi Beta Sigma.
Right. Right.
I can't believe that kind of publicity we're getting. But anyway,
But so you came home, but in Washington you already realized the reapportionment
I was
when the
following
court
that
decision.
thing.
So had you been following Baker versus Carr?
It's not, but all the way back to the Allwright case.
Smith v. Allwright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arkansas, Texas, or what? Texas.
Texas.
One man, one vote theory.
The white
followed
primary,
that.
right.
White primary. So those were things that I
You knew the Primus King case here. Was Primus King actually still around?
That
was
guy
he-
of Albany.
No, I think maybe it's Columbus. No, not the Albany Kings, but the King versus Chapman was the
I remember
Georgia
that.
white primary case.
Tom Chapman.
Um,
He was out of Albany. Tom Chapman.
yeah. Anyway,
But I don't know.
So
I
you
remember
knew-
all that stuff.
Gray versus Sanders and
I studied politics.
Baker versus Carr
I studied politics.
while you were in law school.
Well, even
And
before.
too, right?
Even before the white primary. You know, see old man Walden, that why was just terrific. I mean, that's how I got all that stuff. I was listening to Martin Cocker sit up there and talk about primary. And then my parents were voters. My mother voted in 1948, in the Truman election, my father. And they would talk about that, and I would listen. So I was pretty much up on all of that. I can't remember the
Right.
details of all those cases, but I do know in 1940, the white primary was broken or something like that.
46,
Was it 46? Yeah. Yeah, I know.
So you came back to
It's 46. Yeah, 40, I was a year old.
right. You came back here in '64 after graduating from Howard, and they got you a job at you got a job at the Hollowell firm.
Mm-hmm.
But I gather, even then, you had some reservations about whether you were going to be a lawyer or not.
Oh, I knew I wasn't going to be one. But after I clerked for 3 weeks, 3 months, or whatever, I just couldn't. I couldn't get focused on it like like some people do. They got to do it, and
I saw somewhere that which came first, I'm not sure. You became Community Services Director of the Atlanta Urban League, and I saw for a while you were the Executive Director of the NAACP. Which came first, do you remember?
NAACP.
Okay, so that's like after you leave the Hollowell firm, or?
After I left the Hollowell firm, I joined NAACP, which caused a real controversy.
Okay.
Because they knew I was political. And when I got over there, the national office just raised hell when they found out I was going to run for office. They said, you can't use that. You're using that for a stepping stone. And, it was so silly. And I said, well, it doesn't faze me. I mean, most organizations want somebody from their organization in the legislature. And especially at this pioneering time. So I resigned.
They didn't want you to
No, they
They
told
didn't
me
want
I had
any
to resign. I couldn't serve, and I couldn't
nonprofit.
serve as executive director and serve in the legislature at the same time. I said, okay, fine. It didn't bother me if that's the way you want it. Then that means your organization got one less resource.
Okay. 64 before that time. I mean, that's 65 when you run. So I
Hmm.
assume 64. Tell me about the Horace Ward campaign. Sort of your first.
Once we got in there and started clerking, I saw what he wanted to do. My interest had shifted right on over, and and I said, Horace, Horace he's the nicest man. Have you interviewed him yet?
I'm going to.
You have got to interview him
I
because
knew
he
his
is.
wife real well.
You
Ruth.
knew Ruth?
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a tragedy. But anyway, Horace, such a mild-mannered man, so you really weren't sure what he was trying to do. But I am not. I'm mild-mannered, but I am aggressively mild-mannered. So I just sort of zooped in and said, "Listen, you gonna run? Let me just organize this thing." And I just went right on and did it. We
Was he
were
hesitant about running and jumping in the fray? Or?
no, but you wouldn't know that if you didn't. I mean, he's not like anybody you met who wanted to be a politician. He is not like that. But he is very aggressive, quiet, aggressive. And I just admire him to death. So he let me put the confidence in me to organize this campaign. And it was in that experience that I tested everything I knew about political organization. I mean, everything. And I hadn't been no school for no politics, for no strategizing. It was very natural to me to go out and find a captain on every block in his district, John Calhoun. it was uh, it was very natural for me to say, Harsh, let's go to this club tonight. Let's go to that club. And let's just shake some head. Let's let people know what we're doing on the quiet. Man, we pulled a stunning upset on that thing. O.B.T. Brewer, whose son was president of the school board.
T. Brewer, Tom.
O.B.T.
Oh,
Brewer.
what's it?
O.B.
OBT.
O-B-E-Y.
OBEY.
T. Brewer. B-R-E-W-S-T-E-R.
Whose son was on the.
He was president of the school board.
Right.
And they owned
Thomas Brewer.
George Muse's clothing.
And that was the race, Ward versus.
O.B.T. Brewer. Juniors. Or maybe it was senior. I'm not sure which one it was. But it was O.B.T.
He'd been like the secretary of the school board. Or I know
He
the
was
name. I've seen him on
president.
buildings. Yeah.
He was president.
Okay, so that. And the district extended from where?
Oh, it included most of Georgia Tech, all up in there. It was a white district, basically.
Western Maddox is in that
Yeah.
district, right?
It was about 55% white. But see, we scooped them because they said, ain't no way. Ain't no way. But we had a core of precincts. And I got those figures and I looked at them. And I said, well, number one, we got more votes than they know. Because we had a heavy voter registration drive, the NAACP. So we just outclassed them.
Did you have, did that include like Egan Homes or Herndon Homes?
Yeah,
Or,
all of that. Yeah.
and Clark Howell? Or no, Clark Howell was still white.
It came all the way up to, it looked like to me it might have come all the way up to Howell Mill Road.
Okay.
It included Ansley Park, down,
Into Tech,
Tech.
and over to Howell Mill Road. Okay.
and probably
A little bit of North Side, or
just a little bit. Not
Okay.
no.
I meant
See,
North Side Drive.
northernmost district was like Howell Mill or Bankhead.
I meant North Side Drive going south toward, Simpson Road. or toward,
It came. Listen,
Hunter
the
Street.
northernmost boundary, if I recall, was something like Bankhead,
Okay.
and then
Which was still all white or largely
yeah,
white.
at that time, and it would come all the way east to Piedmont or Peachtree Street, somewhere down in here.
Right.
And on the southern boundary, it went to MLK, and the western boundary, it went to Ashby.
Okay.
No, it went to, on the southern boundary, it went all the way down to
Fair
maybe
Street.
West End.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Gordon.
So tell me some of the other ingredients that you put together.
Well, it was just I don't know whether there's anything special about that. It's just people, just bringing people into the fold and making them feel a sense of ownership, a proprietorship in creating something. That's the secret to winning elections. Period. And everybody said, well, you can't win elections. At that time, media didn't play as big a part, but it never plays that big a part in a state,
Local.
in local election. It's about people. And I could take, not on the eye, but if people have the right sensitivity and the natural inclination, and who's to determine that? I don't know. It might be self-fulfilling for what I'm saying. But if you can get people to believe and trust in you, and you're operating from an honest motive, and that's transmittable. I mean, you can feel that you know it when people are lying or when people tell the truth. And if you can ever get that click, you got another extension to your team. And that's the way we did it. I would take Horace, and he didn't drive, and I was the driver.
Oh, really? Okay.
See, that's why I tell people, I say, Horace was my mentor and my peer and my boss at the same time. I mean, he didn't pay me to do that. I did it because I have love for him and need for that kind of relationship and stimulation. And he would get points into me so quietly. I just never knew how rich that relationship was until I went to Washington when I was no longer here.
Okay. Such as, I mean,
Well, I missed them. I miss having to the discussions about issues. I miss going around.
and how had you met? Oh, okay. Going to Washington the second time, right? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, the second time.
Right, yeah.
No, when I went with the president.
Right. I got it.
You know, I never realized how important
That-
that was to
Okay.
me. And then when Ruth, all this happened before I left, I worried about him, but he's done fine. And one of the first real challenges I had in Washington, politically, with the president, was his nomination
Federal judge.
for the federal judgeship. There were forces in Georgia who wanted to put another young African American on the bench who had just popped up on the scene. And Marvin Arrington played a very important part in securing Harris's nomination, as well as the whole Gate City Bar Association. But it really boiled down to me as to who's going to get the nod. So I got invited to a bar mitzvah up in New Hampshire or somewhere. You know, I got as much business at a bar mitzvah as I got a hole in my head. And Bob Lipschutz, who was the president's personal counsel,
How do you spell his last name?
Lipschultz,
Right.
something like that. Bob had me up there at that bar mitzvah, but the key thing was to get on that private plane and whisper.
To Bob. To
Bob.
Right.
He was whispering to me. That was the deal. Well, I did the whispering. And I said, Bob, I suspect he said enough for me to know that this is what the agenda was. And I told him, I said, I think we're going to have some political problems if Harris is not named. That's all I said. That's all I said.
he was named.
Oh, of course he was named.
So this is really where you finally kind of cut your teeth in a campaign yourself. You know,
Oh, yeah, with the Harris Ward campaign.
from afar you'd seen Clement and you'd seen Calhoun and
I was in charge of this one. This was my baby. I tested everything I'd ever thought. It was deliberate. And Harris was amazed. Everybody was amazed.
Do you remember?
Everybody was amazed.
What are your memories of election night that election night?
I have no idea. You know, that's a funny thing. Of all the highlights in my life politically, election nights have never been one of Because when I finished, I knew we had won, and I was through with the celebration. Uh, Jimmy Carter got inaugurated. I didn't go to the inauguration. People don't know that, though. They say, "Oh, I saw you at this ball and that ball." I was sitting up there in my suite looking at them on television. I was through. I didn't need the. I didn't need the hoopla. My celebration was right here in my head, my heart, my family, and the pride that I had been able to make a major contribution to the election of the United States president. I felt the same way about Horace Ward. He was the second African American to be elected to the state senate, and it was so poetic because he tried to go to the University of Georgia to law school, and we didn't admit it.
Right. Right. Okay, so that's 64. Then whatever the court case and the reapportionment in the state house goes on and tell me sort of how and when you jumped in the fray, to run your own, for your own campaign.
Okay, Horace got installed in January of '65.
Right.
They were charged to redraw the lines to more equally distribute the representation in the state.
Address the issue of malapportionment, right?
It was malapportioned and disproportionate or whatever. So Horace got the drawing in Fulton County. We picked up, it looked like 21 districts or 19 or something, moving from 3 to that.
To Fulton County, right?
Yeah. He drew a district. And I knew he had me in mind, but he never told me. Well, yes, he did, because I told him, I was going to do it if it looked right. And that would, it was perfect. It's perfect. I don't know how to say it any other way. There was 2 people in the district who were highly political, who thought it was theirs. 3. Reverend Borders was one. Ed Billingsley, who since died, bless his heart, was another. He was a young real estate guy in his late 30s or early 40s, probably late 30s. And Judge Pruden Herndon.
Right.
And then on the Republican side, that was Mr. God, I cannot forget that man. Very nice man. But anyway, his name would come.
Let me switch.
I'm
What are the
sorry.
boundaries of the district?
The district was bound by Cascade, roughly on the Avon, Camilton, Avon on the south. Came up and took in Johnny White Park.
Up
And
Cascade.
come on up Cascade, Cascade, but then on the western side, it sort of did some funny things. Beecher Street, as it runs from Cascade, on the northern side, it included all that area on around to Westview Cemetery.
Right. Gordon Road, Westview Cemetery.
Going around to Westlake. Westlake to the railroad on going out MLK.
Right.
Come across the railroad and then go up Hunter Street, go up MLK to Ashby. Go down Ashby, down to Gordon.
Okay.
That's pretty much my original district.
Okay.
55% white
That's right. It's
on the books.
in transition at that point, right?
And I didn't have any white opponent because they had really moved, but they were still on the books. Miss Herndon didn't know that because she was depending on them to get her elected. They put her in the race.
Who is they?
The remaining white people, the Jack Summers and people of political clout who lived in West End and ran it
Right.
until they got scared and moved out. So she was supposed to be that transition person. Ed jumped in. I talked to Ed. I said, Ed, now you got your business. Let me get this. This is something I want to do. I told you about my conversation with Dr. Borders, Reverend Borders.
Not about this one.
Well, I went to him and talked with him, and he was talking about he wanted to run.
Even though didn't he live on the east side?
Well, his church was on the east side, but he
Right.
lived right around the
Oh,
corner
right,
from
okay,
me,
Okay.
from where I live.
Okay.
So I went to see him. I heard these rumblings about him running. I sat down and talked. I said, Reverend Borders, you've had a very distinguished career, which I admire. I said, you have built a church, you're a leader, and you've had a career. I would like to start a career. And I want to start that as your representative. He slapped me on my shoulder and said, boy, you got nerve. He did. That's exactly what he said. and I just sat there and looked at him straight in the eye and said, this is, and he started smiling. He said, you're right. I'm going to help you. I said, I like your style. I like your guts. That's the way he used to talk. So I knew I was home free then. I knew I was home free. And
Now, didn't I see something? Did Leroy run? Was he involved in somebody who ran against you? Tell me about that.
I didn't know I'm sorry. I didn't know the extent and degree to which he was involved. But he and Ed were friends at Morehouse College. So I understand. Leroy didn't know me from Adam. I wish he did know me. I mean, let me take that back. He knew me. I guess he looked at me as a threat. He knew me well. Yes, he did. From the cities, from the Y, from the fraternity,
A threat.
to his political stature. But, he was already the Senate.
The senator.
And I was pretty vocal, and I had great press. I had great press during that period. As a student leader and as an you go check out those files, you'll find. And it wasn't anything that I activated, but the local press was very good to me.
You're talking about the World, or you're talking about the
I'm talking
Inquirer,
about
or
the
you're talking about the
Constitution Journal, the
Journal?
television.
Okay.
The World didn't do nothing for me. I mean, of course, the Inquirer, yes, but I'm talking about the Journal.
Journal
I'm talking Journal
Constitution,
newspaper.
okay.
Yeah.
So he kind of views you as a potential.
Well, I guess so. I'm not making
Right,
anything
right,
of that
okay.
because I've heard people say that.
How did you learn that he got involved in Billingsley?
Well, I just knew it. I knew they were friends. I mean, Leroy didn't go out to get Ben Brown. He wasn't like that. But I got enough indications from people of what was going on.
Okay.
So,
Now, who else was involved in your campaign?
oh my gosh. I've learned people today tell me they were involved. I don't even remember them. That's awful.
Right. Or who are some of the other people? The
Well,
inner circle.
The inner circle. Hilliard Lee, whom I think works for the city now. He was a nice young man. We had, who was my sisters, my brothers, my cousins. It was a family thing. And then, I tell you the truth, I'm at a loss to remember names, but Miss Sturdivant was sort of like the anchor of it. Oh God, with
Okay.
my kids. She got
Okay.
on the phone. I had let her organize a women's committee. Lottie Watkins, she was busy. She was spreading the word. She's a communicator.
And
But
they
the
were
actual work was done by my buddies, Eugene Strozier,
How do you spell Strozier?
Strozier,
Right. Okay.
who became my best man in my wedding.
Okay.
Oh God, all those people. They're there, and I would have to just
Okay.
think about it.
Was there any pressure for people like Miss Watkins and so forth to get on board behind Miss Herndon, Judge Herndon?
No.
Okay.
Let me go back to J.T. Bickers, who was a big real estate man at fraternity. He was around Fraternity Link. Reverend Howard Creasy was my church link. And of course, I had the YMCA movement, like Oceana, is that man they call, the Wiseman's Club. people like that who knew me from the Y, I could pick up the phone. The foundation just had been laid. That's all. It had been laid and it blossomed. That's all.
Now, to what degree was your campaign sort of done in concert with Grace Hamilton's campaign, Julian Bond's campaign, the other, you know, races involving black
Julian and I
candidates?
worked closely together. And once we got nominated, we all became Democrats. And we worked as a, they call it coordinated campaign now.
To what degree did you get support from, like, the Democratic Party?
Oh, they were very scared, they're very proud because we had control of the Democratic vote for that election for all their candidates at the top.
Now, who were some of the people with the Democratic Executive Committee?
It looked like to me,
Fulton County Democratic Party, or
J.C. Doherty was the only black who was active in that. Then you had John Greer had not moved to Atlanta then. He might have
he
been.
might have by that point. I think he had.
Yeah, maybe he had.
It was around that time. Yeah,
He's still living. He died.
but he died a couple years ago.
Yeah, Jack Turner, Joe Jacobs. Irvin Kaler. You heard that name? Irvin Kaler. You have to deal with Irvin Kaler. He was the big Democrat of the New York tradition.
How do you spell Kaler?
Kaler.
Okay.
Irvin Kaler. He was really something. That'd be an interesting chapter for you to check out, because he represented that old line, Tammany Hall, New York, kind of liberal. And you had George Keir with the labor unions.
Al Care.
I mean Al
Yeah.
and Betty, who was
Right.
with legal services. How they doing? I haven't seen. They don't even know I'm a home. I don't think.
I think he has cancer. I think.
Oh,
I
does he?
believe so.
Just like me. Jack and Jack Turner. And
So
Frank.
anyway, what was their reaction to?
Oh, they were all happy. They were all happy about it, and they knew that if Charlie Welton was going to get elected, that was the year that Charlie decided to back out and put us all in a bind. And Lester Maddox was the
Well, that was '66. So this is '65. So
65.
you know, Charlie refused to support the ticket.
Was
in
that
66.
further down? Yeah,
So it's
okay.
the next year,
Yeah,
21 year
okay.
full term.
Yeah, that's right.
This is
Yeah.
a partial term.
The special term. Oh, that was no problem at all.
Okay.
I mean, as a matter of fact, the party didn't even manifest that much during that special election.
So then January. So okay, now Julian's campaign, I understand, was run by people like Charlie Cobb and
Yeah, all the students.
student. I mean, his was a SNCC
SNCC thing.
kind of project.
We had our victory parties together at the Wallahaja Hotel. Ivanhoe Donaldson.
That's right, Ivanhoe Donaldson, Charlie Cobb. That's who I think about when I think about Julian's campaign. But was there any crossover for your campaign, or yours was a different group of people, or
Different
what
group
was
of people all together. See, I didn't even know Julian was going to run to the last day. My campaign was organized and off and running before we even announced. And no, they didn't. So I was an oddball to them, to Charlie and those guys. Although I loved Ivanhoe, we were very close friends. But something kept. Well, I guess I was just, Ivanhoe and those are second generations educated and well off kind of people. I'm first.
Right.
And that's a distinction there. And they wouldn't admit that. But I could feel it, even with Julian, I could feel it. And, but it didn't bother me because they were my friends and whether I was their friend or something else. But in my mind, I was clear on it. But I could tell that was a distinction between how an Ivanhoe saw Ben Brown and how an Ivanhoe saw Julian.
What kind of contact did you have with, like, Miss Hamilton or Mr. Doherty or the other people from Atlanta who were running at that time? If there was
Grace
any-
Hamilton and I got to know Grace during that experience. I knew J.C. Doherty because of his legal work. and we got along fine.
Okay. Let's move to January '65 when you got sworn in. Of course.
66.
Oh, I'm sorry, '66, right. Let's take us there. Clearly,
Let's
clearly,
talk about before that weekend leading up to that.
yeah,
Julian and I went to lunch. That picture right there you saw
yeah.
was taken at the what is now the Holiday Inn, something, one of them little hotels near the Capitol. We left that meeting. I took him to his office on Nelson Street. I went home on Napoleon Drive. By the time I got relaxed there, I got a phone call from Spivey, the reporter. He said, listen, I just interviewed Julian Bond, and he was criticizing or advocating draft card burning or some statement Snick had released. I said, well, I don't know nothing about that. I haven't seen the statement. You got statements? You want to read it to me or let me see it? Because I don't comment on things I don't know about. So I didn't hear no more from him. But later that damn day at the news, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock news, all hell, U.S. thought, all hell that broke loose in Atlanta. New black legislator to criticize the U.S. government or something. I mean, it was like one of them treason-like statements. It was a terrible situation. So I got on the phone after I heard that, and I called the governor, who was Carl Sanders, Leroy's friend. And maybe I called Leroy first. I called Leroy first. And I said, Leroy, we gotta try to do something about this. Call speaker.
Who was George T. or George L?
George L.
George L. Okay.
No,
George might have been
George
George
T.
Right.
Who was my guy. I mean, I was in the loop.
Even though you weren't yet.
And they just sworn in.
Okay.
Yeah. And we got some conversations going. I finally got a hold of Julian, and I tried to tell him, I said, Julian, let's back up. And hold on, let's make no more comments. And his crazy brother-in-law just kept whipping the fire.
Who was that?
Howard Moore.
Okay, right.
And Howard's a good lawyer, good man. So I was so confused and so frustrated that this was happening. And but I got in the middle of it and tried to bring some heads together. And finally, we said, well, Ben, let's see if we can sit down and work out something.
Who?
George T.
Okay.
And Carl. And we kept on working. I'm trying to figure out what was the deal. We were going to get Julian to make a statement to try to clear it up. And the effect of it would have been to restate it, apologize or something, do something just to get the boys off his back. And as I thought about it, that wasn't going to do, because that would have been demeaning him. So he thought Julian was scared to death. He didn't know that he had done. I mean, he didn't know what it was. So we go without a compromise on resolution. That Monday morning, Tuesday morning, or whatever Monday morning, we sworn in. And, but before that, we had a hearing. We had a hearing. And I made, was that before we were sworn in? No, that was after we were sworn in, we had the hearing. I made my first speech on the floor of the House in support of Julian Bond. My first speech. And I supported him strongly. J.C. Doherty supported him strongly. And then it got to be, Julian was sitting up there breaking out in hives. I mean, he just broke out. He was a nervous wreck. My neck had been, I got all the tensed up here. It was a rough situation. We didn't know what was going to happen. The white boys from the South and the North.
Sloppy Floyd was
the leader. Yeah, he was the leader. Anyway, that's the way that goes.
Well, that's not, well, we could go, do you want to just have a break now and kind of
Yeah,
finish for
I mean,
today?
I'm-
Because let's pick up with this statement next time and
I'm-
go back
I'm-
to